Hello? Hi. Hello. Is this audio visual? I have a problem. I want to play a YouTube video, and the sound is not playing in the speakers. I'm anywhere in the square.
There's no technician. I've gone to Russell Square, but he gave me this. If you want to speak with him.
Hello. Thank you.
You press it to turn it on.
Sorry?
Like that. And then
Is RM26? Yeah. N for no, for November.
I'll ask my question after.
Hello. Yeah, I'm playing a YouTube video. Okay. Yeah. In the speakers. The sound is on in the computer, but I cannot get it on the speakers. Yes. Not from the speaker. I don't hear it from the PC, but the mic is on in the PC. Yeah, but there's no technician. I already asked for the technician is not anywhere in the square, in the building. Okay. No, it's good. It's good now. The sound is coming up. Thank you. Bye. Can I ask everyone to be quiet?
By Koreans and improve their living standards. 33,267 villages in Korea received free cement. For the next 2 years, only villages that showed promise will get additional cement and steel.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, all good. I hope this is, I really like this topic, and I hope it's going to be one of our exciting lectures. So, let me find full screen mode here. Okay. Okay, today I'm going to talk about the developmental states. First of all, any idea about these pictures? Yes? Someone tell us who these people are? Anyone? Nikita?
The one on the right, I don't want to. He's basically the president of China right now.
Xi Jinping? Middle? Please. Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of Taiwan. And this guy? Park Chung-hee, leader of South Korea. The general who kind of leaded the economic miracle in South Korea. Now, the first question, what do we mean by developmental states? Very simple. Dictatorial states that have been very good at promoting economic development and industrialization. And interestingly, they happen to be compressed in Asia. So basically, we call these developmental state model Asian development model. China is following it now. Taiwan and Korea have been following it during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Today, I'm going to focus on South Korea. Let's focus deeply on South Korea to get to know what do we mean by developmental states. Now, why study this topic? Obviously, to learn from a successful case of a state-led development, a successful case of state-led industrialization. Of course, we have many failures of state-led development, but let's focus on the economic miracles. Now, the lecture has 3 parts. The first part I'm going to take a look at, I'm going to briefly look at the performance of South Korea in the last 44 decades. Then we're going to talk about how did South Korea develop. This section has 3 subsections. We're going to talk about the role of labor, demography, the role of investment in human capital and physical capital, and most importantly, we're going to talk about technological learning. How South Korea managed to go up the ladder of technological learning. And finally, the most important question, what can we learn from the experience of South Korea? Can we imitate it in other countries? So let's start. South Korea in comparative perspective. This is the income per capita of South Korea in 1960. As you mentioned, is the same as Ghana, almost roughly as Senegal, and way below Brazil. However, in a span of 30 years' time, the income per capita increased by 6-fold in South Korea, and the economy grew by average of 6%. Every year, imagine income per person increasing by 6%. Income of each individual increasing by 6% per year. So in the span of 30 years' time, that translates into increase of 6-fold in income per capita. And of course, this is 1990, way before, 7 years before the East Asian financial crisis. Okay. And the other countries were left behind. This graph shows you exactly the remarkable performance of South Korea. South Korea having the same income per capita of Ghana in 1961 and way below Italy. Italy income per capita is about above 10,000, and South Korea's income per capita is below $1,000. Now, in a span of 4 or 5 decades, South Korea today has the same income per capita of Italy, an advanced country, while Ghana has been increasing. The growth in Ghana has been stagnating. So a tremendous story of economic miracle. Let's look at the changes in life expectancy. Again, in 1956, life expectancy was roughly 52 years. Now today, it increased by 80 into 80 years. You know, just a span of, let's say, roughly 65 years, 2 generations. That count as 2 generations. Okay, from grandparents to grandchildren. The average person in South Korea has a life expectancy of 80 years. Their grandparents have the life expectancy of only 52 years. An amazing miracle. Now, you are already familiar with this graph. We had this on week 4, the catch-up. After World War II, this is the USA being the benchmark. First, after World War II, Japan closed its income gap with the US, and then Taiwan and South Korea closed their gap with Japan. A catch-up story. First, Japan caught up with the United States, the richest country. Then South Korea and Taiwan caught up with Japan. And as we talked about, whenever you have economic development, you have structural change. The economy changes from being dominated by agriculture commodities towards service sector and, more importantly, industrial sector. The process of structural change, you see industry becoming more and more important in terms of income generating as a whole in the economy and becomes more and more responsible for employment in the economy. Any questions so far? Now, let's look at the second part. How did South Korea develop? Of course, we talked about, each session for development, you need, labor, physical capital, human capital, and more importantly, technological learning. And we're going to look at each of these items in South Korea. So in a way, we are using the things that we learned throughout the semester to analyze the process of economic growth in South Korea. Basically, thinking about, how much growth of in South Korea was due to favorable demographic condition or favorable investment in human capital, and how much it was due to technological learning. Let's start with demography. The economic miracle of South Korea happened at the same time of their fertility transition. You had a very rapid drop in fertility, from 6 kids per woman to roughly 2 children per woman in a span of 30 years. Of course, we talked about this. What are the effects of this when the fertility drops? Anyone wants to remind us?
Aging population.
Sorry?
Aging population.
Yes, but what are the favorable conditions for economic growth? That's a bad thing for economic growth when you have an aging population. Yes?
Decrease dependency burden.
Sorry?
Decrease dependency burden.
Exactly. Thank you. As fertility drops, it increases the youth dependency. You have less number of youth to take care of. So basically, the mother and the parents can freely enter into the workforce. And also, they can save a lot of their money. They don't have to spend it on education of kids and basically taking care of kids. So basically, the savings can go up, and also the entrance in the workforce can go up. Exactly. Thank you. So basically, as it was mentioned, because of these demographic conditions, total dependency rates were going down in South Korea. That means people who could not work, that means below the age of 14 or above 16, were comprising a low percentage of population. Most of your population were at the working age. Demographic gift. We talked about this in week 5. So basically, South Korea enjoyed a demographic gift. A lot of people in the working age population, a lot of people in their a large workforce and a low dependency rates on that workforce. As we mentioned, you can follow this change of fertility rate in the age structure of the economy. At the beginning, the age structure is very young. In the 1950s, you have a high youth dependency ratio. Then the fertility goes down. As you see, the youth dependency goes down. And basically, in time, this part of the age structure grows. The part that you can work and enter into the workplace, the age between, let's say, 18 to 60 years. As you have it in 1970, this is growing. In 1990s, this is actually at its peak, demographic dividend. A lot of people at the working age. Any questions about this? Yes, Farah?
We argue that drop in fertility could be a result of higher economic growth.
Yeah, we could do that. But essentially, it's a chicken and egg. But let's say it doesn't matter. What we can agree is that once it drops, it helps economic growth. Yes? We could definitely agree with that. Okay? That once the fertility drops, it could help with economic growth. Why? Because it reduces the dependency ratio of the population. You have a lot of people in the working age. Okay. So favorable demography, favorable number of people. The quantity of people were favorable. A lot of people in the working age. Now let's look at deeper. It's not just the number of people for growth. It's the investment in physical capital and investment in the quality of your labor and human capital. By the way, this is a recap. We covered each of these points about South Korea in the previous lecture. So this is just, in a way, a summary of things we discussed in the previous weeks. So let's focus on how they did in terms of education, right? what was their investment rate in education? Very, very impressive. This graph tells you the percentage of expenditure on education expressed as the total government expenditures. For instance, this tells you that in 1980s, South Korean government devoted 25%, 1/4 of its expenditures to education. Very, very high. Imagine 1/4 of the government expenditures going to only one item. Going to only one item. So very high expenditures on human capital. And you can see, impressive results, a rapid improvement in enrollment ratio in primary education and secondary education as well. A very impressive performance in education. Any questions? Again, at the university level, a dramatic improvement in South Korea in terms of enrollment of females in the university. For instance, in 1975, almost 1/3 of people who were going to the university were females. And this has been increasing at a steady rate. So basically, the story of the human capital is a lot of investment in human capital. Of course, good starting point, as we're going to mention. It's got to do with the colonial history of South Korea. Japanese invest a lot in education, so South Korea started from a good place, but then again, they heavily invest in education. So you have a lot of, basically, to combine it with demography, you have a lot of people who are in the working age and also educated. A lot of people in the working age were also educated. Now let's look at the investment in physical capital. Number of people, their knowledge, human capital. Now the physical capital, the infrastructure, the machinery. Again, as you remember, Korea invested a lot in physical capital. Basically, they started with a very low investment rate, about 10%, like every poor country. You only save 10% of your income, therefore you invest only 10% of your income. To very, very high rates in the middle of their boom, they have been saving 1/4 of their income. And therefore the savings also always get channeled into investments. High rate of investment in the economy. You don't spend your income on consumption goods. Basically, you put it in a bank, and the bank gives a loan to an entrepreneur, and that entrepreneur invests that money, spends on capital goods. Or you pay tax to the government, and government spends that tax on public infrastructure, on ports, on roads, on airports, physical infrastructure. Again, this is the saving rates in South Korea, a tremendous rise. From about 5% of their income at the beginning of their economic miracle to the middle, let's say 20% and 1/4. Very high savings rate. So far, to recap, favorable demography, lots of quantity of labor in the working age. Those people are highly educated comparing to other countries. And also, they invested a lot in physical capital, infrastructure per person, machinery per person. However, as you remember, the most important ingredient of growth was this: productivity, learning to use the machinery, mastering the technology in each industry, whether it's labor intensive, capital intensive, or knowledge intensive. And this is going to be the most important part of the lecture. Any questions so far? Okay. How did they learn the technology? Did they follow the advice of free marketeers that they said, remember we had it in foreign trade, just open up your economy to trade and foreign investment. You're able to compete in these sectors because of the pressure of competition. You master the technology. You gradually become rich and you can move to these sectors. Or the people who were against free markets, people who were for state intervention, they always said, no, this is not going to happen automatically. Your forces of competition, international competition, are not enough for you to learn the technology and master the technology in each of these sectors. You need a deliberate help from the state in each of these sectors. Now, as obviously as we mentioned at the beginning, South Korea went for the second option. The state heavily intervened in the economy. The state heavily supported the national firms to master the technology in these sectors, to learn from more advanced countries. So we're going to talk about how state intervened. This is very important. The devil is in the detail, okay? The devil is in the detail. How they intervened is very important if you want to learn from them. Now, whenever a state intervenes in an economy in order to help the firms to go up the ladder of industrial upgrading, we call that intervention industrial policy. An activist industrial policy. So whenever we say that country X is following industrial policy, that means the state in that country is deliberately intervening in the economy to encourage industrial upgrade. It's not just standing idly and watching the economy upgrade itself automatically. It's actively intervening. Now, what was the industrial policy of South Korea? How did they intervene? How did they encourage technological learning? Now, it's important to focus on the relationship between the state and the firms, mainly private firms. Any idea what they call the private firms in South Korea? Yes? Someone said it? Large conglomerates in South Korea?
I can't pronounce it.
Shibuls. So the relationship between the states and the private firms. Of course, in the private firms, you have the labor, both the human capital and the quantity and the physical capital. The most important thing at the level of firm is technological learning. So they copy this technology, but they have to learn it and master it. So this was the relationship between the state and private sector. South Koreans said to their private entrepreneurs, we're going to give you a lot of favors. We're going to support you in different ways. For instance, we're going to protect you behind high tariff rates. Whatever industry you're starting, for instance, if it's the assembly of electronic goods or producing washing machines, we're going to increase the tariff rates for the import of washing machines so that you could kickstart your industry. So we're going to protect you behind high tariff rates. Secondly, we're going to give you a lot of credit subsidies. That means cheap loans. If the market rate for borrowing is 20%, we're going to give you 12%, way cheaper. 8% below the market rate. It's a huge favor. You're reducing the cost of capital and the investment for that firm. And we're going to give you tax breaks. We're not going to tax you a lot. And we're going to devalue our currency, make our currency cheap relative to the other currencies. So what are the side effects of this? What China is doing now? Making your currency cheap relative to the other countries. Yes?
More export?
More exports, exactly. But the other side of it,
Imports are more expensive.
imports are more expensive. So in a way, it's a form of tariff. It's a form of protection as well. When your currency is cheap relative to the other currencies, the cost of imports are high. The price of imported goods are high. So in a way, it acts as a tariff. Yes?
Isn't that frowned upon to devalue the currency in today's age?
Yeah, we're going to come to that, what is different in today's age. That was Cold War age, and we're going to talk about a little bit what was different, basically, why they were allowed to follow these policies. And today, those days are gone, right? Those days were Cold War, bipolar world. This gives a little bit of opportunity for developing countries to follow their own policy. These days, I'm sorry. Yeah.
China depreciated their currency by buying like lots of foreign reserves in dollars to appreciate their currency so that their exports be more competitive in relation to the rest of the world.
Sorry?
So doesn't China, they try and depreciate the value of their currency by buying up large amounts of dollars, so by like appreciating the dollar, therefore their exports seem more competitive in comparison to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
so don't they then devalue their currency
Yeah.
in comparison to another?
Yeah, they do.
So it is still done.
Yeah, it is still done, but much more difficult.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying. It's much more difficult. China can do it. A small country cannot do it. We're talking about China. Yeah. So devalue their currency. We're going to give you infrastructure in specific zones, special economic zones. We're going to provide you with ports, with roads, and we're going to regulate foreign investment regulation in favor. If you want to, for instance, produce a washing machine, you want foreign firms to give you the technology. You go to Japan, Sanyo, okay? You ask them to come over to South Korea and invest. When they do it, we support you. We say that, Sanyo, if you want to come over to South Korea and invest, you have to create a joint venture with a domestic firm. You have to transfer the technology. You have to buy your supplies from local suppliers, not Japanese suppliers. So we're going to support the local firm and make sure the foreign firm transfers the technology and the know-how to the local firms. Now, combination of these, we call them industrial policy. A lot of favors. Basically, the government is giving a lot of favors to national firms. And basically, they gathered all these favors in a specific geographic zones. They call them special economic zones. Special economic zones. We still have it. The exact things were, most of the things that I'm pointing out today also applies to China. Okay, but we'll come to that. That's a different lecture. Okay, special economic zones. That means that in those geographic zones, these regulations apply. We're going to give you tax breaks, high tariff protection, but for the others, it doesn't apply for the other parts of the country. So basically, it's a good way of saving, for instance, on infrastructure. You don't need to, put roads in all over the country, right? You basically focus all your investments in infrastructure in one geographic zone. And as we mentioned, when firms cluster together, knowledge spills over. I learned the technology, but the other Korean firms learned the technology from me. Knowledge leaks. That's the benefit of clusters, the exact thing that we see in China today. Why they're clustered together? Because they learn from each other and they reduce the cost of production. That's why the competitors are clustered together in coastal areas in China. Why coastal areas? Exports. You got good infrastructure for exports there. However, this is not what makes South Korea different from other countries. Other countries in the 1960s and 70s did the exact same thing. A lot of favors to their firms. The most important thing that made South Korea different was this. Export targets. They said that we're going to give you these favors on the condition that you export some of your products internationally. So strings attached. We're going to give you favors, but in return, you're going to export some of your products. Now, what are the benefits of this? Anyone? Yes?
These firms are not cushioned and they don't lose their competitive edge.
Exactly. Incentives for technological learning. When I push you to compete globally, I make sure the forces, the stick of international competition is above your head. You don't become too complacent. Another benefit, very good, thank you. Another benefit, I'll be impressed if someone can tell me another benefit.
International competitiveness?
Sorry?
International competitiveness.
No, it was already mentioned.
Acquisition of foreign currency,
Yes, and why is that good?
because you've devalued your own currency.
No, but what is good about gaining foreign exchange? You export your good, you get dollars. Sorry, may I, raise of hands, Nikita?
Security.
No. Yes.
Imports are then cheaper.
Yeah, imports. You can import more. Why do you export? Because you want to import. Right? You cannot buy goods from other countries with your own currency. Nobody accepts Korean currency. No. In today's world, people trade with currencies that they have confidence in. Okay? Dollar, euro, pounds, and nowadays actually Chinese yuan. It's getting up, but it's not there. You cannot import with your own currencies. You have to export, earn foreign exchange, and then use that foreign exchange for imports. And therefore, as a developing country, you can import machinery from other countries, which is vital for your industrialization. So if you want to industrialize, you need to import a lot of capital goods from other countries, because most of the machinery that you need to build your own industries, you have to import them. And that requires foreign exchange. So basically, you need to export. So, in a way, the most important thing that differentiated South Korean intervention was the export targets. What do we call export promotion? Export-oriented, outward-oriented industrial policy. So, this was the strategy of South Korea. They say, we're going to select industries. First, we're going to pick labor-intensive industries. We have a lot of cheap labor. Okay? We're going to give a lot of favors to the firms, but we ask them to export. This was the story of 60s. Then in the 1970s, South Korea decided to switch to capital-intensive industries because of basically Cold War. We're talking about a military dictatorship in South Korea, which was very worried about the war with North Korea. So basically, the military junta said to their firms, to the chaebols, and say, look, we're going to reward you if you move away, if you diversify from labor-intensive industries to capital-intensive industries, which are related to strategic industries, like producing cars, steel, chemicals. Okay. And then in the 1980s, they rewarded their firms to move to knowledge-intensive industries. And this basically process gave birth to global brands that we know today. They pushed them to go global. All of those brands, the chaebols, the private firms, were created during this era. And my favorite video clip has got to do with that. Gangnam Style. Do you know Gangnam?
It's a suburb.
It's a suburb. Who lives in that suburb?
Wealthy Koreans.
The chaebols. And that guy is making fun of the chaebols, their lifestyle, basically. And interestingly, I saw he lives in there now. He lives in Gangnam. He got rich out of this song. He moved to Gangnam. Okay, very ironic. And I, found another picture of him. Samsung is sponsoring him right? The person who you're making fun of, you're sponsoring, beautiful. Got to love capitalism, right? If you can make money out of everything, right, it doesn't matter when it's just making fun of you or not, Got to love capitalism. Okay, now I'm going to show you a video clip that goes through the story of 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think we have a problem with the sound, so you need to bear with me.
Managed to escape the club. In 1945.
Light good at the back, or do you want me to reduce the light, or it's fine? Reduce it? Yeah. Good.
Korea gained independence from 36 years of Japan's occupational rule. But the Korean War broke out. Even before they could enjoy the fruits of their newfound freedom. Countless North and South Korean soldiers lost their lives, along with another 36,000 troops from 21 foreign nations. Taking a toll of some 5 million casualties, the Korean War left the newly formed republic in a state of devastation.
Korea was very poor, all destroyed. We had to fight for the liberty and democracy of the Republic of Korea.
However, during the busy efforts of restoration, it was nothing but education which became the nation's highest priority. Although they were struggling from day to day, Korean parents did not ignore the education of their children.
1950s, before the miracle starts. Again, you have a good starting point in education.
Grateful for the sacrifice of their parents, children would walk for miles in order to attend school. Despite the war's devastation, the government continued to invest in education. This dedication to and investment in education produced a highly trained workforce that would later on become the impetus for Korea's economic turnaround.
Sacrifice for next generation. Remember, investment is always a sacrifice. You forego current consumption for the benefits in the future. Same with physical capital, same with human capital.
Unable to recover from the ruins of war on its own, Korea was forced to rely on foreign aid. But when the foreign aid subsided after completion of the major restoration work, this caused Korea's economic growth to stall.
1950s, Korea was a typical stooge government in the 1950s. Foreign aid accounted for about 80% of the government's budget. Imagine, we have a very corrupt government which was highly dependent on the US in the 1950s.
This was a dire situation for a nation whose budget relied more than 90% on foreign aid. It was at this time that the military regime came to power.
1961, General Park Chung-hee grabs power.
Having succeeded its leadership made economic development their top priority, if only to quell widespread public turmoil. In order to spur economic growth, the military regime founded the Economic Planning Board, giving it unprecedented powers for planning, allocating the budget, and for attracting foreign capital. The Economic Planning Board developed a 5-year plan, which was to be the new blueprint for economic development. In 1962, the first 5-year plan was put into action. The problem was the acquisition of funds. Unfortunately, the United States reacted with indifference. Berger, the United States ambassador to Korea at the time, also made a negative report on this plan to Washington, D.C. But Korea did not give up. After endless funds, the Korean economy took a nosedive.
This is 60s.
Fortunately, the light industry sectors like textiles.
Bear in mind, a lot of females, textiles. A lot of females usually get employed in the textiles. So this is one of the main things about East Asian Miracle. A lot of females in the workforce.
Pigs and needlework developed rapidly and created momentum for the Korean economy's growth. While guiding the economy with policies such as rationalization of the exchange rate and interest rates in 1964 and 1965, the government also responded to the market's demands and fostered free enterprise. However, since the light industries relied on low-cost wages, their competitiveness weakened. The government began to invest in new industries, such as steel, coal, chemicals, machinery, and shipbuilding, to create a powerful engine for economic growth.
I think it is dynamic as well as their foresights towards future and their interpretation of globalization into business opportunities.
Steel was the first heavy industry to be developed. Despite skepticism and concern about the feasibility of such a venture, the government launched a massive effort to build an integrated steel mill in 1970. The United States and the world looked upon this project with doubts, as the steel industry requires massive investment and cutting-edge technology.
The exact thing. World Bank, all the international students said this is against your comparative advantage. You're not rich enough. You're leapfrogging. You're not going to compete in this sector. And interestingly, they said the same thing to Iran, India, Pakistan, any country that wanted to start a steel industry at a time that they were not rich enough. So this is kind of a universal thing. You know, South Korea was part of a trend that they didn't listen to World Bank and they did it anyway.
And a more advanced nation than Korea at that time had attempted this task, but failed.
World Bank.
In spite of such skepticism, the Pohang Steel Mill began to produce steel in 1973.
Only 3 years. In 3 years' time. Wow, this is... POSCO was the state-owned steel firm in Korea.
재정이 중심이 돼서 그 얘기를 맡아줬지. 그래서 산업의 쌀이라고 하지 않나? 철이. 그리고 청량농업이 물론 들어갔고.
Although it entered the steel industry about 60 years later than advanced nations, Korea would soon become the world's 4th largest producer of steel. The success of this primary industry paved the way for the advancement of other steel-related industries, such as shipbuilding, automobiles, fine machinery, construction, and electronics. grassroots effort, coupled with a global economic boom, helped to fuel an amazing economic growth in Korea. But a crisis emerged from an unexpected source. In October 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out. With the price of raw materials skyrocketing, the domestic factories ground to a halt while inflation soared.
Korea was a net importer of oil, always, being very poor in natural resources.
This was a critical blow to Korea, since it was a country without a drop of oil, which had just begun to industrialize. But this crisis proved to be an opportunity. The Korean government used the construction boom in the Middle East, which resulted from the skyrocketing oil prices, dispatching workers to the region and constructing $10 billion worth of buildings a year, and used the oil crisis to stimulate economic growth.
So in a way, they exported the construction sector. In a way, you're exporting your service. Saudi Arabia wanted to build a road, and you're good at construction industry. You say, I'll come over there and build this for you. It's a form of export, but it's not an export of good, it's an export of service.
Around this time, another oil shock occurred. After learning valuable lessons from the first crisis, Korea overcame the second oil shock without much difficulty. During the two oil shocks, most other countries decreased their investment, but not Korea. For the first oil shock, Korea invested heavily in its steel, oil, chemicals, machinery, and shipbuilding industries, while in response to the second oil shock, Korea boldly restructured its economy. Their strategy was right on target. The phenomena of the three lows, the US dollar, oil prices, and interest rates, helped the Korean economy to flourish in the 1980s. Meanwhile, with the struggle for democracy in June 1987, each class of society started to voice their demands. This sparked the efforts to realize democratization, which was lagging behind the nation's economic development. Korea's export-based economy became even more competitive, and the nation's per capita GNP rose sharply.
Moving to knowledge-intensive industries in 80s.
Korea's economic development efforts. Thanks to this success, Korea became a member of the WTO and a member of the OECD in 1996. But these successes had blinded the nation to the lurking dangers of the global economy. Quite simply, it could be said that Korea had popped the champagne cork too soon.
Now, you had the 1997 East Asian financial crisis, which I'm not going to go through. So you already had a massive improvement between 60s and 1960 and 1990. Let's have a 6-minute break. And afterwards, we're going to follow the same story that you see here in numbers. Just a second. Bear with me for a moment. Just want to double check it's recording. Okay. You don't want the voice to be recorded. No, actually, that's one of my. So maybe. Good morning.
Now China, right, it devalues its currency. It exports this to us. It gets dollar. You export this, you get dollar. You can use that dollar to buy something from someone else. So you export, you gain foreign exchange, you use that foreign exchange to import. Remember, you cannot import without foreign exchange. Nobody accepts your own currency. They accept the currency which is reliable. So you need to earn the currency to export and then import. The only country in the world can import without exporting is one country, the United States, because they can print dollars. Yeah. Sorry? The other way, makes the imports expensive. It's a form of protection. Yeah. So in a way, you're still hurting your imports, but you export, you earn foreign exchange, but you still import. And China now has the largest reserves now. They export, you spend some of the money on imports, but the rest, you save them. Yeah.
You say that North Korea is the world war.
Motives. What is the motivation of a dictatorial regime to do all this? Yeah, it wasn't for the Cold War. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, right. Once I upload, I'll put the source. Okay. A very good question was asked in the yes.
Throughout this course, right?
Yes.
Throughout this course, when we discuss Korea, is it on a
Yes. I know it's not a very SOAS friendly assumption, but I know.
North Korea is our country anymore.
Okay, I try to always say South Korea, but yeah. I'll do my best. Okay. An interesting question was asked during the interval. They asked me, what's the difference between this they followed and Rustow's economic model? Well, Rustow was a fervent proponent of free trade. He was a fierce anti-communist. Okay, he talked about the disease of communism. So he always believed that you know. As a free trader, he believed that just follow your comparative advantage, right? You will go up the ladder automatically. You don't need to jump in. So Rustow was one of the guys who were very critical of India, South Korea, Iran to produce their skill and to invest in the steel industry. He said it's too soon for you. You're leapfrogging, and this is going to create a problem. So the difference with the Rustow is that Rustow was a typical free trader. You don't need intervention. You're going to upgrade in time. Now, let's follow the story that I told you, that the documentary told you in numbers. Okay. The phenomenal and remarkable increase in exports in South Korea since 1960s. In 1962, for instance, they were gaining less than 10% of their income from exports. Then this jumped to 10% in the 1970s. And then by the end of the 80s, it almost increased to 30%. A jump from 10% to 30% in the 1980s, at the end of 1970s, sorry. So by 1980, they earned about 30% of their income out of exports. China is exactly the same as China today. China earns 30% of its income out of exporting goods to us. Let's look deeper into exports. Let's focus on at the jump. At the early 60s, this is tremendous. The exports rose from $4 million to $100 million in a span of 5 years. From 4 million to 100 million. And manufacturing exports were responsible for the bulk of this. You know, about half of this, for instance, in 1960 and 97, 1963 and 1964, and about 60% of it in 1965. Exports of manufactured goods, mainly labor-intensive goods, like, you know, they assembled washing machine, they assembled Walkman, you know, for Sanyo, they assembled TVs, you know, textiles, a lot of textile production. They were the leading, as you remember in the document, they were the leading exporter of textile at the end of the 1960s. Exactly what China is doing now. So it would be interesting. One way is to say we can look at South Korea and maybe predict the future of China. Maybe. They're very different. We're talking about very different animals here, right? One with 30 million, you know, 1 billion, 30 million, 1.5 billion people, and the other one roughly about 6 to 7 million people, right? It's incomparable, really. But in a way, if you remember, as you had economic growth in South Korea, the capitalist class grew. Okay? The labor also became more organized. The dark side, I didn't tell you about the dark side of this economic miracle. The dark side of the economic miracle was that in the 1960s and 70s, the government brutally suppressed labor unions. Brutally suppressed. So it was an alliance between the chaebols, the capitalists, and the state.
make sure that we suppress labor, they don't organize, and they don't demand a lot of wages, We're going to increase their wage. We're going to increase their wage, but not as much as their productivity, okay? We're going to give part of their productivity. We're going to increase them to keep them happy, okay? But we're not going to give them what they deserve. So you had a brutal suppression of labor in the 1960s and 70s, and that was the dark side of it. But in time, as you have economic growth, the capitalist class enlarges, the labor class, the industrial labor becomes more and more larger. So they get to organize themselves and finally demand their rights. And this was the exact thing that happened in South Korea. Is the same thing going to happen in China? We don't know. We don't know. But it's a useful example to have it in the back of our mind. The Asian development models almost always end up in democratization. Now, let's look at the exports in the 1970s. At the 1965, it was still 100 million, okay? It rose to about $1 billion, 700 million in 1970s. So the exports in 1965 was about $100 million. Here, about 700 million in 1970s. And this is mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. In the 80s, the exports grew by 16-fold, increasing from $1 billion to $16 billion. In all manufacturing goods, yes? Sorry? Taiwan as well, yes? Yeah. Sorry?
Do they have a similar model?
Yeah, exactly. One slight difference. That South Korea mainly relied on chaebols, private firms, but Taiwan mainly on state-owned firms. That was the difference. And let me give you a little bit of history now. I'm getting warmed up. One of the things that happened that's very interesting in the 1960s is one thing was very different about these two countries. Both of them, Taiwan and South Korea, had experienced a successful land reform. A successful land reform. And the first people who did land reform in these countries were, guess who? Japanese, the colonizers. They did the land reform in these countries. And what is the benefit of land reform? It crushes the concentration of power, the elites. It just wipes out the elites that have been shaped since the Dark Ages, the landowners, right? The most snobbish people on the planet, right? Our heritage goes back to centuries. It's one of the most entrenched classes. So when you get rid of the landed elite, you're basically kind of reinventing the society, the power structure as well. So both of them, before their economic growth, have done a successful land reforms that crushed their landed elites. So the first round of land reforms was done by the Chinese, and the second round was done in the 1960s by the support of the US. US pressured South Korea and Taiwan to do land reforms. Now, this actually goes back to your question. An interesting observation about South Korea. This tells you that this chart shows you that production in South Korea was dominated by a small number of firms, chaebols. In 1974, the top 10 chaebols produced 15% of the income in the country. 1984, about 70% of the income. It's still very high. Samsung today accounts for a quarter of the total income in South Korea. Quarter. You don't have this in Taiwan. You don't have this in China today. China is closer to Taiwanese model. Let's rely more on the states. Here, you see that as you approach 70s and 80s, South Korea moves to the production of heavy industries, machinery and chemicals in industrial production. They become more important as a percentage of overall industrial output. This is combined share of machinery and chemicals from overall industrial output. In 1974, about half of their industrial production was about 40%, not half, about 40% of their industrial production was focused on machinery and chemicals. And this was mainly because of the state. You know, the state pressured, and not pressured, gave a lot of incentive to Chaebol to move to capital-intensive industries because of Cold War reasons. Gerald Park was tired of being reliant on USA. He wanted to end US military support. This is actually interesting. In the 70s, South Korea moves to shipbuilding. It's a very strategic industry. It's very, very important for your military. And look, in the 1974, they account for only 2% of the ships ordered worldwide, and they increased their market share to 20%. In a matter of decades, in 12 years, they increased their market share from 3% to about 20%. Amazing. And they are still today one of the leading countries in shipbuilding. Any questions on this? Yes?
I can't really say that well. Was that one with the C? What happened between 1974 and 1976?
I don't know. Short answer. Sorry. I have to disappoint you. Now, interestingly, South Korea did all this without relying too much on foreign corporations, without relying too much on foreign corporations. Of course, they relied a lot. Guess who was their main foreign investor? Sorry? No? Japan. The same people who colonized them. Right? They always looked up to Japan. You say, we need to catch up to our colonizers. Okay? So, General Park normalized their relationship with Japan in the mid-1960s. They normalized their relationship with Japan. 1967, South Korea sends troops to Vietnam. And the motivation of the war is very important for industrialization. South Korea is sending troops to Vietnam. Now, this shows you that, yes, they invited foreign direct investment. This is the total amount of foreign direct investment. Now, this gives you the amount of it in relation to the overall economy, okay? It never reached even 1% of the economy. So, it was not a lot of foreign investment. They didn't rely too much. And this is one of the main things. We're going to come to this, right? What is the benefit of not relying too much? You don't lose your independence in policymaking. You rely too much on foreign technology, they're going to dictate things to you. Foreign corporations are going to dictate things to you. Now, this gives you the change in labor productivity, okay? The labor productivity, technological learning, the workers start to learn those industries, labor-intensive industries and then capital-intensive industries. They became better and better. This is an index that shows you the increase in labor productivity, Labor productivity, the labels became better and better. Remember, when the productivity goes up, the wages goes up. Now, wages were always lower than productivity. What does this mean?
People just aren't getting paid enough.
Are not getting paid enough. Why not enough?
Because people at the top are just holding on to money. The money should be there because the productivity is high. So
Yeah.
that means their bosses are just holding on to money and not paying people properly, so it's corruption.
Yeah, it's a way exploitation, I would say, yes. Because under free market, each labor has to get amount of productivity, okay? If you produce 10 pounds per hour for your boss, okay, your wages should be around 10 pounds, really, okay? Less than 10 pounds, because some of that 10 pounds have to go to the boss, but the boss cannot pay you 2 pounds. If in every hour you're producing 10 pounds, that is your productivity. In every hour you produce 10 pounds for the business, but in wage you get 3 pounds in return. That means that the worker is exploiting you. Under free market, this shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be a gap between the productivity and the wages. But of course, remember we had the suppression of labor in South Korea. Said, we're not going to give them, the amount of, according to the productivity, but we're still going to increase their wages. Okay? The most important graph, technological learning. Between 1965 and 90, South Korea grew by 9%, 9% rise of income every year in 30 years time. In 25 years time. And technological learning was responsible about 3% of this growth. So you had a very good rate of technological learning in South Korea. Again, because of exports, pressure to export, right? Competition. I'm going to set you export targets. Now, the most important question that goes deeper into the politics. Why South Korea was able to get the intervention right? Why South Korean state was so good at intervention? What made the state different from India, from Brazil, from Nigeria? What was it different about this state that they could all those other states intervened in the economy, but not as good as South Korea? Now, South Korean state had 3 important characteristics. Whenever a state has these 3 important characteristics, we call it a developmental state. A developmental state. First, commitment to rapid industrialization. So ideologically, all the elites believe in economic growth as an end. China is the best example today. Commitment to rapid industrialization. You can be committed to rapid industrialization not just because of your ideology and also because of other reasons, geopolitical interests, right? You're threatened in the Cold War by North Korea. So you need to industrialize in order to protect yourself. You're tired of being too reliant on the US for protection. So this has been the main impetus, geopolitical reasons, international reasons has one of the main reasons, one of the main motivating factors for developing countries to industrialize. Yes?
Can we also add that internally South Korea was tired of being dependent to foreign aid, but at the same time to fight Cold War, the USA in order to avoid South Korea joining the communism sort of showered them with foreign aid?
Well, that was 50s. In the 60s, Johnson wanted to cut down the aid. And mainly, one of the main reasons is that, again, General Park was tired of being reliant on aid. Why? Because aid comes with strings attached. They had to listen to what Johnson and Kennedy was saying to them. And South Korean elite didn't want that. They said, you're hell with your aid, we're going to export and gain foreign exchange. That was one of the main impetuses for South Korea again, to go for export promotion. Right? They didn't want to rely on American foreign aid. So, commitment to rapid industrialization. Second one, a competent policy-making institutions. South Korean state sent a group of elites, the best universities in the US during the 1950s and 60s, to learn economics. I'm not sure whether anybody came here. I need to look it up, whether you had a person, but I'm sure about MIT, Harvard, and Cornell.
Interestingly, those universities actively supported the elites coming there and being educated because it was part of a Cold War struggle. They saw it as, education as a weapon to win the heart and minds of the elites in the Third World. So you had a group of policymakers, technocrats in South Korea who were educated in the best economic schools in the US. Now the final thing, so you had commitment to rapid growth and you had good policymakers. Final thing, you had the independence. Both from foreign powers, you're not a stooge, you can make your own decisions, and more importantly, from domestic social classes. This means that you're a dictatorship. Social classes, domestic, for instance, the capitalists, the land-owning classes, don't have a lot of influence over you. Okay? It's not like here. Bankers have a lot of influence on the state. So the state have a very little policy rule. Sometimes they have to listen to what is good for the financial elite, which is not necessarily best for the society. However, South Korea had autonomy from foreign powers and also domestic social classes. Again, China today. So these three attributes allowed South Korea to choose good policies and, more importantly, implement them effectively. This is very important. Implement them effectively. Yes?
Can you please explain the last bit again?
The autonomy. Which one?
The Fed's reason why.
Okay. I'll example with this example. Here, the state is giving a lot of favor to these firms. Yes? Well, at the same time, you want to discipline them. You put export targets in order to not to spoil you. You say, I give you this favor, but in return, you need to export. Precondition for that is that you have to have a strong state relative to the capitalist. If you have a very strong capitalist class, they're not allow you to do this. You cannot discipline them. The best case, Brazil. In Brazil, ironically, landed elites were in control of the most industries. They diversified into industries. And they were a very strong class, and the state could not discipline them. So they could not push their firms towards export. So the relationship turned the other way around. These guys extracted favors from the state. Okay, so you need autonomy from your domestic classes. It's the same if this is a foreign corporation. A foreign corporation comes and invests in your country, you need to discipline them. You say, I have to have an independent, enough independence to push you to transfer your technology to me. Exact thing that China is doing now. A foreign firm comes in and says, you have to transfer your technology, you need to buy your equipment from local suppliers, not from the foreign suppliers. So for that, you need to have a discipline. You need to discipline domestic and foreign firms. You need to have a little bit of autonomy. More importantly, you need competent policymakers inside the state. Why? This is the most beautiful part of intervention. Lots of room for corruption. Because in the end of the day, a person is sitting in Ministry of Industry and decides which firm deserves the cheap credit. So in a way, one bureaucrat in the Ministry of Industry decides that, okay, we're going to allocate this loan to this firm. Now you have two options. You choose a firm which is more productive, or you choose a firm that gives you the highest amount of bribe. A lot of room for corruption. Why? Because basically the state is giving a lot of favors. So people in the private sector have a lot of incentive to bribe the officials to get access to those favors. Classic rent-seeking. So if you don't have good technocrats, if you have corrupt technocrats, if they're not well paid, right, you're going to have a corruption. These favors don't go to the most productive firms. These favors go to the most politically connected firms. And this was the most important thing in South Korea. The favors went to the firms that were exporting most. You reward the more productive firms. and you punish the less productive firm. If you have bad bureaucrats, technocrats, you reward firms that give you the most bribe. Any questions about this? Now, I'm going to finish. No, I'm not going to finish. We have an interesting case study of Samsung. So let's follow the story of Samsung. It's an interesting case. A newcomer, a global brand, which was supported by the government step by step from the beginning. And now it's a global leader in an industry. So let's follow its story. Samsung Electronics was born in 1967. Interestingly, Samsung was a Chibo before then that was diversified into many things. They had textile firms, they had hotels, they had insurance firms. The government told them that, you diversify into electronics. So the government told them that you're into textiles, construction, insurance, and hotel services. Now I'm going to encourage you to enter into this electronic sector. Now, interestingly, they started this sector with Sanyo, a joint venture. Sanyo, a Japanese firm, which was rival of Sony at that time. Sanyo, a Japanese firm. So they asked foreign investors to come in. 1969, this was the first group of Samsung's electronic workers who were sent to Japan for training, to Sanyo. They sent 137 trainees, and they were sent to Sanyo and NEC, and they were sent to learn the assembly of electronic goods. Now, mass production begins in the 1970s. Sanyo Electronics starts to assemble TVs, refrigerators, air conditioners, and record cassettes. Now, furthermore, Samsung expected that there would be increasing number of people who want to buy washing machine in the near future, so they decided to develop their own washing machine. This is early 1970s. Bear in mind, it's interesting, a lot of women employed in there. 1976, 1 million TV produced. We assembled, okay? 1 million TV assembled. 1978, Samsung gets the award from the government for exporting a lot. And interestingly, you see that the government told them that I'm going to give you cheap loans if you meet the export targets. And also, the government encouraged them to export to the U.S. So they opened up their first exporting office in America in 1978. 1979, with the support of the government, they entered into more knowledge-intensive part of electronic goods. The government gave them a lot of support to say, go for the more income-generating part of the business, or high value-added parts. So they established their own R&D center in 1979, and they started to produce computer chips, the semiconductors. 1983, they started producing PCs. You see a gradual shift. It started in the 70s with the assembly of electronics. Now they slowly moving to knowledge-intensive parts. 1980s, they managed to produce lots of semiconductors, so they become a competitor in that industry with the financial support of the state. Today, one of the leaders in the electronic industry. So, if we look back to our example of mobile phone, Samsung today, it started with this, and it learned these parts. Computer chips, more knowledge-intensive parts, and it gradually moved to marketing and retailing its own product, including its own software. And interestingly now, they outsource the assembly to China. Right? Comparative advantage, and also, it's much more profitable for them to move their resources in here and here. The best case of technological learning through the support of the government. Now, finally, what can we learn from South Korea? Can we imitate the experience of South Korea today? Now, the main lesson that we get is that for successful intervention, you need to select good policies and you need to implement them effectively. For instance, in the case of South Korea, good policies expose them to competition. Right? You give favors, but also put export targets on the favors. Attach the favors, condition the favors to export targets. So good policy choice. And also good implementation. Make sure that you have good technocrats, you pay them very well, so that they distribute the favor to the more productive firms, not to the more corrupt firms. Good implementation. Now this requires a developmental state, as I told you. A commitment to rapid economic growth, good policy-making institutions, good technocrats, and a lot of autonomy from your domestic capitalists and foreign capitalists. However, not anymore. Not anymore. In today's world, we're living in the post-WTO world. It's not Cold War days anymore. Back in those days, South Korea was at the heart of the Cold War. So the US would give a lot of leeway to that power to South Korea to follow their own policies. Today we live in a unipolar world. We live in the world of WTO. WTO basically have forced developing countries, all its members, to reduce their tariff rates since 1980s. WTO was created in 1940. This tariff reduction was forced by the World Bank and the IMF, and since WTO created, the tariff rates was reduced further. But this is not the most part of the story. The most part of the story is this. Most of the policies that South Korean followed for development are not possible under WTO rules anymore. WTO rules do not allow this. If you give credit subsidies to your exporting firms, it's illegal. Other countries can file against you in WTO. You have to pay fines to them. You cannot give tax subsidies to them. You're still allowed to devalue your currency, right? So not all the policy tools have been removed. However, the policy space is reducing. The WTO is taking away a lot of policy options from developing countries. For instance, they have to follow very strict property rights rules, right? On the WTO TRIPS agreement. It's very hard as a net importer of technology. You have to have a good property rights system, right? You cannot copy the technology for free and learn it. Exactly what South Koreans did. They had very weak property right regimes. They copied the technologies. This is exactly why, nowadays you have a lot of talk about Chinese adopting property rights, because the leading industries in the West are frightened that China might copy the technologies. And you have the clear example of kicking away the ladder. It's not just the white man in here. South Korea is in here. South Korea has been pushing for WTO rules in the last 2 decades. It's ironic. They use these tools to become rich. Now, they are removing these policy tools for developing countries today. A clear example of kicking away the ladder. So the problem we have today is that we can say, yes, we can in a way learn things with South Korea, but we live in a very different world in terms of global context. However, we know that we could still learn one thing. To get the interventions right, you need to have a good state. Intervention is not bad or good in and itself. If you get it right, it's good. If you get it wrong, it could be disastrous. Now, let me summarize the lecture. Let's take a look back. Okay, how South Korea developed. Favorable demography and investment in human capital and physical capital. Yeah. But what about technological learning? Acting as a developmental state, the Korean state actively facilitated technological learning and industrial upgrading in national firms by following the export promotion policy. So they had favorable demography, they invested in human capital and physical capital. However, the main point, technological learning, the government actively supported domestic firms. However, they came up with a good policy, export promotion. You give a favors to domestic firms, but make sure that they are exposed to competition. Force them to export a percentage of their production abroad. Finally, it is difficult to imitate the Korean model today due to the shrinking policy space on WTO. Thank you. Oh, clap, thank you. On this jolly note, it's opening on the middle, YouTube, yeah.
So, you know, the technology yes, one did a conversation on Wednesday about South Korea and industrial policy. They said technology being it wasn't really technology great.
Yeah, it's disputable. Even today, some people say that the investment into capital.
That's what my confusion is.
No problem. If we could defend it, no problem.
I'm interested in learning more about the development trajectories of South Korea and Turkey.
South Korea and Turkey. Send me an email. Well, first of all, if you have small and domestic market.
Well, but if you said like giving money for domestic,
No, but then you say I protect the domestic market. You can sell it domestic, but you have to export part of the product as well. What?
to get for the government.
Export subsidies is illegal. You cannot subsidize your export. Not anymore.
But if you subsidize domestic selling, but the ketchup, you have to...
Again, it depends. You cannot subsidize with high tariffs. You have to reduce the tariff.
So you cannot subsidize at all.
Again, look, you can subsidize with different tools. Some of those tools, you're not allowed to use them anymore. Some of those tools, you're still allowed. So it's not that you cannot subsidize anymore. You have fewer options than before.
So they're still low.
For instance, you can still subsidize with currency. Devalue your currency.
Yeah.
But not with export, not with credit subsidy. Yeah.
Yeah, quick question, Ramin. On the shipbuilding market share, was the fact that the South Korean increase helped by the surrender of the European